So we've got a little bit of Battletech Q&A here. Weather, terrain, fog, snow, ice, water. What about those impacts on the Battletech field of battle? That's what we're going to jump in and explore. I have a few answers and a little bit of tactica for this. I've played a little bit of homebrew for this, but as far as I can tell, and I've been looking through some of the supplements, as far as I can tell, it would be up to the individuals playing, or perhaps a GM, a game master. You can play Battletech with a game master, right? In exploring that perspective over hard, fast rules. But as always, I've got a lot of war games kicking around in my mind, a lot of Battletech kicking around in there. If there is a definitive list, let me know. And fellow Battletech mech warriors, mech commanders, and veterans, there might be something out there that I'm missing. Now, the primary kind of terrain, it's definitely not weather, but let's call it environmental conditions that we see in Battletech is water. I won't say, I'm trying to think if I have all of the new hex maps at this point. Even as being a completionist, I did pass on a few, but I have most of them and I've played on all of them. Water exists in Battletech as lakes, as rivers. You will find water. I think most of the hex maps do not have water as that impact compared to some of the older hex maps. The standard pack-in of, I think, 4 at least had 2 from that perspective. Water changes the game. The best way to think of it is as reverse elevation with a special rule. Hills and mountains, elevation 1, 2, and 3, blocking line of sight. Can you see over it? Can you indirect fire over it? Is it obscuring your mech? If it's partially obscured and you take hits to the legs, they're just ignored. There's a lot of differences with elevation. Elevation lets you see over things, but then might let you be attacked by many things. We see this on City Fight, City Tech, different elevations for buildings and structures. Water is the opposite of this. It has elevations that the mech begins to sink in and also protect. There are also rules where you can be completely submerged and essentially non-targeting or invisible from that perspective, depending on the rules that you're playing. The main thing with water, the ability to cross it and navigating that, is the heat sinks. Really looking what part of the mech is submerged and what heat sinks are there, you're going to flush heat a lot faster. This was a game from a long time ago on one of the classic hex maps. I had an awesome parked in water, and it was I was just flushing. I was flushing heat like it was nothing. You're firing like crazy. Kind of inner sphere mechs that have PPCs in certain locations and heat sinks in certain locations. You're just absolutely gonna just blast away. So that is potentially one of the biggest advantages to water, to really flush heat and boost your heat sink capacity. Second to that, though, environmental effects. I have played a few games where it's been kind of a hidden narrative or a hidden type ion storm, which you might be aware of certain mechs, but the targeting is off. We played that because this leads into this idea that Battletech can possibly also be a role-playing game. You can have your mech warrior as a role-playing character, play that, jump into the mech, and have the GM, the game master, set up certain scenarios and kind of act like a referee or control opposing mechs and set these house rules for terrain and weather. My understanding, though, is for the most part, it doesn't impact because, although it's not always specific, the various sensors and detection abilities of mechs will kind of cut through that and be able to see and target and utilize that. Now, I could see if you're playing ice or other special rules, and nothing wrong with sitting down with your opponent and coming up with an agreed-upon set of special rules. We see this in the City Fight, City Tech, skidding and making sudden moves and things like that, depending on the streets that you're running on. There could be potential piloting checks and falling over and moving hexes, additional hexes that you may or may not want to do. I could see a little bit of that depending on the speed or depending on even with vehicles, the way they're moving, that could be kind of neat ahead of time to take into account. I find, though, I would like to play something like that, risk versus reward, meaning we could play with additional skidding or movement, make a piloting check, but I would also like to play it where reward the craziness, reward the glory, where maybe you could make an increased pilot check, maybe with a difficulty, +2 or something that would allow you to move extra hexes, kind of like sliding into the slide to try and move further and bank and control it. Of course, I'd be doing that with like everything and just flying all over the place. You couldn't give me that type of temptation to try out and not see what happens from that perspective, not see what happens on the table and try that out. But in terms of hard, fast rules, I'd have to look a little bit more. And I'm going to jump in. So I leave that to my fellow veteran mech warriors and mech commanders. Absolutely the rules for water. Think of them as the inverse of stacking and elevation, just kind of reverse. It also cuts off parts where things can't travel. You can submerge, you can hide depending on the level. Where are your heat sinks? It's going to flush. And other weather and environmental effects, I would be open to playing them. I would be open to explore them because ultimately for me, not only the social experience, but this idea, I've got all my miniatures and toys, you've got all yours. Let's experiment. Let's try with different ideas. Let's try different things on the table and see where we can go from there.